the main thing was like, I didn't have a reason to stay. Let's say I had more reasons to leave than to stay. And so I knew it was going to be, a wild ride, meaning like, I don't know what's on the other side, but I knew at least it would be something different. And I was ready to take that leap.
Hello, and welcome to Working Your Way, the podcast dedicated to exploring the journey of authenticity in the workplace and discovering how to navigate it your way. I'm your host, Sandhya Sadakar, and today is another episode in our Career Questions series. Now, this is part 2 of a 2-part series where we're talking about taking career breaks, sabbaticals, leaves of absence, going back to school, and a lot more. And as we do it here on this podcast, we're sharing stories from individuals with different intentions and different experiences, talking about why they took a break from traditional work, what they did with their time, and how it impacted them. So make sure to go back and check out episode 46 to catch part 1. Now, in this episode, part 2, we're going to be talking to 2 former Working Your Way guests, Tekisha Harvey and Coffrin. And we'll join Kat later in the episode to dive into her time off, where she immersed herself in a creative project that was very personal, processing the loss of her parents as she explored the stories of their lives. But before that, we're going to talk to Tekisha Harvey about taking a sabbatical to travel. Now, Tekisha's career story is featured in episode 2 of Working Your Way. She's a marketer with a background in consumer brands, and she's now leading marketing for a recruiting company in the cannabis industry. And with her co-founder, she produces Canna Curious magazine. Now, in this conversation, we're going to talk about the value of travel, what it's like to experience new environments, and the impact it can have on expanding our perspective. Okay, welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited to have you back on.
Well, I love talking about career breaks, so thank you for having me.
Yeah, and it's something that we did talk about in your episode a little bit, and something that you and I have in common, taking a career break to travel, and maybe not taking it in order to travel, but travel being a really big part of that time away.
Yes. I mean, I when I took my career break, I definitely was like, I'm leaving the country. And I went to, I think, 11 countries in the course of probably about 2 years. But that wasn't my initial intention. It was supposed to be like, oh, I'm going to go for 2 months to Africa and, come back and just relax. But, life has a way of taking other turns.
Interestingly, in December of 2019, when I was in Bali traveling on my career break, I decided that I wasn't ready to go home yet or stay home yet. And I booked my trip to Colombia in January of 2020, which is where I met you. So it's literally the same thing. I was like, yeah, no, there's more here. I'm not ready to go back to reality yet. And that's how we became friends. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And Colombia is a special place, one of my favorite places. So I'm glad we met there. So it's like solidifying like my good feelings about that country.
Yeah. So tell me about what factors were going on in your life. Like what led you to deciding to take a break in the first place?
One of the first things was just, I was burnt out. I was tired. I felt like I was, living the same day over and over, and I was not feeling happy. I had a great career. I was promoted a few times. I was making really good money. But I just felt like, is this it? Is this it? And I was not feeling this higher level of satisfaction. I think my job just started to just annoy me more and more. And I literally asked myself, like, what am I doing this for? I was living in a city that I didn't like. I was, bored with my job, and I'm tired of dealing with, a lot of microaggressions and different things at work, and also just tired of doing the same thing over and over in my job. And so I was like, I don't have kids. I'm not married. There's nothing holding me here. Why am I just kind of staying here just to say that I have a good job and, a nice car and things like that. And so that was like the main thing was like, I didn't have a reason to stay. Let's say I had more reasons to leave than to stay. And so I knew it was going to be, a wild ride, meaning like, I don't know what's on the other side, but I knew at least it would be something different. And I was ready to take that leap.
What was keeping you there that long, or why hadn't you left up to that point?
Fear, fear of change, fear of like what will I do to make money? Essentially,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
the child of immigrants, and like, coming in here is really ingrained in me to, have a good job, go to school, do all the right things. And so to kind of walk away from that was a very hard decision internally. But in the end, my feelings or my feeling of self-preservation, I think, won out. And I was like, I have
Hmm.
to try and do something. And to be fair, I had a friend that I worked with previously who had moved to Southeast Asia to work and was having this like incredible journey. And I was like, that also inspired me. Like, okay, if she did it and she's okay, then I'm sure I'll be okay too.
I think that's a big part of this conversation is like, there wasn't a reason to stay, but it's not like common to be like, well, if I don't like it here, I'll just quit. Like the default is to be in a job and stay in a job and have a normal 9 to 5, right? And so like I think and I guess to bring, like cognitive science into it, it's like in order to get out of that norm, there has to be a catalyst, right? And maybe that was seeing one other person who did it, and it was like, oh, that's possible. I could do
Yeah.
that too.
And it was a person like me, same age,
Yeah.
and so it was like, oh, same, she was black too. So it wasn't like someone just going backpacking who I knew had a trust fund or had, monumental amounts of money to support them. Like, no, we were like, we're on our own with whatever money we had. And so seeing someone that was in a similar situation to me do it and succeed, and also just seeing the result in terms of like her level of happiness, I was like, I want that. Like, take me there. I want to experience that. And so at the time, I also felt like if it doesn't work out, I can always come home. I can always get
Yeah.
another job. And I never felt that I had this mantra, like, I'm a smart girl, I'll figure it out, especially when people were, because that's what people do. They kind of project their fears onto you. And I had to like block all that out and say, you know what, I'm a smart girl, I'll figure it out. And I did. And I did.
Oh my gosh. That just brought back this memory of like, I think I had come home in between trips and I was like texting with a friend of mine from high school and she's like, how's the job search going? And I texted back, I'm like, it's not. Like my whole point was to take 4 months off, which ended up being longer than that, but to take 4 months off and not do anything, right? Not work on my resume, not think about what I wanted to do next. But a lot of people, and that happened in many different ways, a lot of people kind of put their expectations on what I was doing. Well, she doesn't have a job and it's been 2 months, so she must be searching, right? Even though I communicated to people like I'm just gonna do me for a while. And I think that's an interesting dynamic that other people also, and a lot of times it's great intention, right? It's very loving
Right.
intention. People worry, they want the best for us, they want to make sure we're safe. And so they ask these questions or have their fears and doubts and they come out. But I love the like, I can figure it out no matter what. Like
Yes.
I'll figure something out and it will be fine.
Yes, yes. I find myself saying that a lot even today. Like, it's fine. I'll figure it out. It's fine. Because
Yeah.
it's like life just plays itself out. There doesn't have to be a grand plan. And sometimes if you just like let go and surrender, you'll be surprised at what meets you and what greets you. And so a lot of times it's exactly what you need. It may not always come in the ways that you expected it, for sure. But, at the end of the day, I found that taking that career break literally changed my life. Literally changed. I feel like it changed the trajectory of my life. I met so many more heart centered people, so many more genuine people, people who are like looking for just, to be their best selves without all of the distractions and the narratives of the shoulds that we were told we should have. And that in and of itself is like, has been the greatest gift because it's opened my eyes to a lot of different cultures around the world. I've gained so much more empathy and compassion for people. I've had like so many random acts of kindness shown to me that I think if I stayed in my existing bubble, if you will, of corporate America, I wouldn't have had those experiences. And so about a month ago, I came upon my, anniversary, 7-year anniversary of quitting corporate America. And I was like, wow, like I feel like I'm such a different person now and so much more in tune with
Yeah.
myself and what I want out of my life. And I'm just forever thankful for that experience and for taking that leap, you know.
So, how did you spend your time? How long were you gone? And how did you spend your time?
So I was it's interesting. Before I started working, I quit in July of 2017. I traveled for probably the first 5 months. And then I came back
Hmm.
home for a month, and then we traveled again for another month or two. That's kind of was like the thing. I traveled for a month or two, come back home for a month. But within like the first 6 months, I started doing some consulting because I was like, testing out like what can I do? You know, I still want to work. I just didn't want to be in the same corporate environment. And so I started out consulting, figuring out, you know, who did I want to work with? How did I want to help them? And I did some, you know, foundational marketing strategy and branding work with small businesses. And so that also just kept my mind stimulated, and it kept me fine tuning to like what I wanted to do, what I, you know, and then, you know, fast forward a couple years later, I started working with big startup organizations. So I worked with a startup organization in the cannabis industry doing marketing consulting, doing market research actually for the cannabis industry. So doing focus groups and surveys. And that was like kind of my foray back into work. And I kind of pivoted into the cannabis industry, which is something I never would have thought I would have gotten into. But I think like again, my openness from my time away
Hmm.
of like, there's more than one way to earn a living. There's more than one way to live a life. I had this openness to trying different things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing in your story like being away from kind of the routine and the normal, and being in new countries and meeting new people and seeing new ways of living, all of this stuff, like a lasting impact of this time was this kind of like more expansive thinking, or like, I don't know, a curiosity that comes with travel, of course, but being open to a lot of other possibilities beyond what you would have even imagined before.
Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head saying like curiosity. I think I'm a naturally curious person. And I just basically travel gave me the opportunity to like be curious and learn new things. And I think that when we're curious, like that's when new ideas come in. Things that I never would have thought of start to unfold. And that curiosity is still with me. I mean, that's why it's like, you know, I have my own business as well. I run a cannabis magazine for women. I'm always interested in talking to new people and understanding like, you know, what they do and how they live their life. You know, sometimes it's interesting though being back like in, you know, I'll say the States, but I've been back for a while now. But I notice when you meet people, people always ask like, first off, what do you do? And I'm just like, when I meet people, that was like the last question I ask, because I think that what we do, it doesn't define who we are, but we're so trained to identify with our career or our way of making money as who we are as people. And I usually
Right.
ask people like, what do you like to do? Or what do you do for fun? Or something interesting about, you know, something about them that I may have learned in the first few minutes. But I think that it's kind of that mindset of identification with yourself as, you know, what you do for a living is shifting. I think we see it a lot with Gen Z, and and
Yeah, for
I take
sure.
a lot of learning from them. People criticize them, but I do take learning from them as well.
I totally agree that we need to learn a lot from Gen Z about not tying our worth to our careers. And I know that I'm still someone who wants to find a sense of purpose in the work that I do, but it was really hard to try to make that happen like while I was in a job, and explore that side of it while you're actually doing the day to day. And I think for me, like taking time away gave me space to process and explore and regain my curiosity, which I think I had kind of lost a little bit along the way.
Yeah, I think taking a break also gives you an opportunity to like reflect and like step away from the day to day and actually like take a step back and look at your life, your work, what you've accomplished. Like, you know, when we're working, we just go, 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 go. We don't realize sometimes how great we are and what we've done. And so when you take that break
Yes.
away, and especially talking to other people and you start talking about what you do, like I was talking to people and I was like, yeah, I did this. And they're like amazed. And I'm like, oh no, that was just my job. But yeah, it's like, yo, you are amazing. You have done some great things. And so, but taking that break gives you that, you know, that moment of clarity and that perspective to be able to appreciate your value and what you have contributed to an organization. but also what you've learned and how it's like shaped you as a human.
Yeah, totally. Oh my gosh, I love that. So why was travel the way that you wanted to spend your time? Why was that the right thing for you as you took a break from traditional work or took a break in your career?
It was like one of those things that like I always feel like I had these callings to places, and once I started, it was like it was just meant to be. Like it was, I just I was like, oh yeah, this is it. You know, it's like doing something you've always wanted to do, and then you do it, and you're like, yes, I why did I wait so long? And I also knew that it was just part of that fulfilling that curiosity. And once I started, like different people that I met would be going to different countries and places. And I'm like, oh yeah, sure, I'll come visit. And then each time it just got created more and more experiences. I think I built the muscle around travel. And it also became fun to be like, okay, where Airbnb am I going to get? Where am I going to stay? What am I going to do while I'm here? Let me find a co-working space. You know, who am I going to meet? And that kind of fueled the desire to continue to travel, and also just having really good experiences while traveling. The other part is like, I don't have any kids, got married, so I had the freedom to do all of that, and that
Yeah.
was a big motivator of like, do it now. Also, you know, you're young enough, your knees are good. Do it now while you can,
Right.
you know, instead of waiting. And that was just what was calling to me. Like I feel like I had this like spirit of adventure that I kind of repressed, and
Mm,
traveling was, it was the perfect fit of being able to express my curiosity and my adventurousness, and it just all came together.
amazing. So it sounds like, yeah, even like cultivating, nurturing that curiosity and like learning how to think differently or envision new possibilities for your life were like some of the things that you took away from that. How else did it impact you?
I mean, you know, I one thing that I'm not going to act like everything was all gravy and all good. There are some negatives, like financial negatives. Like I basically was doing really well in my career and making a good amount of money, and I have not been able to recoup that. And that is something that I'm okay with. You know, I've had to dip into
Yeah.
my 401k, but and people ask me this all the time, and I'm like, I don't care. I would not trade it for who I've become, who I knew I needed to become, to be more at peace with myself. And also, it just put, like I said, it changed my life. It changed the trajectory of my life. It made me a more fearless person to go out and try new things. As I said, I became an entrepreneur. I got into the cannabis industry. I've met all these amazing people around the world. I have friends around the world. Like the financial difference is, it was, for me, it was worth it. And but I do caution people on that. Like I did plan ahead before I quit. I saved money for like 3 years and saved all my bonuses and paid off all my debt so that I could have this freedom. You know, so it wasn't just willy nilly. And I do know that it's a privilege and a gift to be able to do that. And so I tell people,
Yeah.
if you can't take that full time off, you know, take a month off if you can, and do different things that you've always wanted to do to explore. And it could be locally, like going to, you know, that new boutique hotel and having a cocktail there, or going to a new restaurant. Like those are things that I feel like that spontaneity is a key need that we need in life. And exploring that, it doesn't have to be on this huge grand scale. Like I said, I plan for it. It may look like, oh my God, people are always like, Keisha, where are you now? You're in another country. And I was like, no, but I planned for it. You know, I saved a lot. I sacrificed in purchasing some things in order to, you know,
Yeah.
save for my sabbatical. But again, overall, I would say it was a positive experience. It's something that has become part of how I refuel, like traveling often. I'm very, you know, lucky to have a career where I do work remotely. And so I can work in other places, whether that's in the US or if I, you know, choose to go to somewhere else abroad. But I do know that I need at least 2 to 3 trips a year somewhere else to kind of continue to fuel my creativity, to fuel my
Mhm.
sense of adventure and curiosity. And that makes me a better person. It makes me a more centered person. It makes me a more at ease, at peace person, so that I can approach work now from a much healthier perspective.
I love that. I think acknowledging the privilege and the realistic aspect of it, but also there are ways to do this in your daily life in more practical ways just to like jolt yourself out of the routine. So
Yeah.
very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing more about your time away and what it meant to you and all the amazing things you did. And I'm so grateful that you and I met through
Yay.
that forum.
Synchronicities, man. Let them flow and trust that what's for you is for you and it's going to unfold.
Beautiful. Okay. I love this conversation, and not just because travel was a really big part of my own sabbatical or because Tekisha and I met during mine, but talking about just how restorative travel can be. Of course, I am a big believer in rest, but I think there are lots of different kinds of rest. And sometimes doing something that sparks your soul restores you more than doing nothing. And I think that's what travel does for Tekisha. And I know that that's what it does for me. There's something to being in a totally different environment, getting out of my routine, or being somewhere that my familiar life doesn't exist. I think for me, it makes me much more present in every moment. And that's something that I can really easily lose when I'm in my normal day to day. Now, forcing yourself out of autopilot, and then at the same time, I really like to travel surrounding myself with really beautiful scenery and eating really great food. So it's not like I'm totally uncomfortable. Maybe my style is really making sure that I'm comfortable physically, but then stretching myself mentally and emotionally throughout the experience. Okay, so we're going to get to our final guest in this two-part series. Now, I have another, as I mentioned, former Working Your Way guest, Kat Coffrin. Kat is the founder of Captivating Consulting, where she does brand strategy for companies and people. She writes, speaks, and she creates in so many different ways, including the podcast that she's going to talk about in this conversation. Now, if you want to hear more about Kat's career story and get a little bit of an insight into all of her expertise, check out episode 24 of Working Your Way, where we dive into the topic of personal branding, knowing yourself, and articulating your value. Now, in this conversation we're going to have today, we talk about the sabbatical that she took in the middle of 2020. I could say it was really about reigniting her creativity, but it was also so much about reconnecting with her emotions and being really present with herself and the grief that she was experiencing after losing her mother. Now, we talk about it all, how she came to the decision to take time off, how she almost backed out of it, and what she created during the time, including everything that came after. All right, welcome back to Working Your Way, Kat. I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I will never say no to you.
Ah, I love that. I will not abuse this privilege.
I think we both always have a lot to say.
Well, I caught you at a great moment when you were reflecting on your sabbatical. And this episode is all about taking career breaks and how they show up for different people and what they mean to different people and what you do during that time. So we're going to jump right into talking about your sabbatical.
One of my very favorite topics.
I love it. What was going on for you in your career world when you decided to take some time off? And we'll talk about the personal part as well. But
I'm sure that will find its way in. Yes. There's nothing quite like a sabbatical to weave together our personal and professional journeys, right? Mm-hmm. It is deeply personal. And I left my corporate job, which I was at for a little bit over a decade, the last day of January in 2020. Auspiciously started my own business the following Monday, February 3rd, 2020. And in a lot of ways, I thought that was the moment, right? I thought that was the big change. But what's funny, and I'm sure you're going to relate to this and agree with it, but it took me living into it for about 3 more years. That wasn't the moment, really, because 3 years later, I found myself ready to face and process a lot of stuff I hadn't been facing while I was killing myself in corporate America. And really, in hindsight, I could say a lot of it's very personal, just to the point where we started. But the professional burnout, the trends and themes and everything that I felt, the fallout of 16 years of spending all of that time climbing somebody else's ladder, building somebody else's company, traveling crazy, stupid global trips on schedules that don't make any sense, building a family while I'm doing all of that, living in DC, stringing our lives together through some weird combination of logistics and nannies and childcare and whatever. It took about 3 years after I left corporate America before I started to feel steady enough to be able to say, I've got the space now to take some time. So yes, that was what it took. But really 3 years later, what I started to find was that in the course of working for myself and all of the things that we face when we go out on our own, it was a process of having to reconnect with who I am, rediscover parts of my identity. We've talked about this before, that I gave over so willingly to my career, reclaim all of that. And then, of course, in parallel, build a business designed to help other people do the same thing. Personal brand strategy, really helping primarily like women executives through mid-career transitions. At the same time, I lost my mother. She passed away in April of 2022. She had been declining for a very long time. My dad had passed away 6 years before that. And so it was a little bit of a perfect storm. But after she died in that spring of 2022, I found a new therapist and I worked through a lot of shock, a lot of pain. I covered a lot of unprocessed grief, even from my dad 6 years before. It makes a lot of sense. And because I worked for myself, I was able to really move at a slow pace that I had never done before. I learned a lot about my nervous system. And she taught me all about this idea of fight or flight and how many of us, especially in the corporate world, especially not only, but especially high achieving women who externalize their validation and become almost addicted to all of the ways that the corporate world rewards us for being good at what we do and for fitting in. All of that was tied into my ability to grieve my parents. Mm-hmm. And I was still working, but at a very slow pace, and something fundamentally shifted where my connection with my personal self and my feelings and all of these really powerful experiences of processing and facing grief in a way I'd never had the luxury of the time and space and capacity to do. That shifted and work became second for the first time in my whole life. Mm-hmm. So it's like it took me 3 years and losing parents and all of this work to suddenly say, oh my gosh, I have all of these other things I want to explore and do that have nothing to do with work. And I remember in the fall of 2022, I was talking to my therapist and I said, I think I want to lean even more into this. I'm enjoying so much all of this additional space that I'm having to process this grief and work with you and the self-discovery that's connected both from a professional and personal standpoint. Maybe I should take some time off and do a sabbatical. And I think I'm going to make something. I started on January 1st of 2023 at my therapist's suggestion, doing the artist's way. Have we talked about this?
I think maybe we have, maybe not on a recording, but yes,
I couldn't remember because this is one of my favorite topics. So, and for anyone who's not familiar, The Artist's Way is a beloved 35-year-old book by Juliet Cameron, who's a former screenwriter and playwright. She was married to Martin Scorsese for like a year or something.
That's what I didn't
know. And people turn to it in any discipline. Not just for writers, right? People who need to reconnect with their inner selves, who know that they want to make something, but they're not quite sure what it is, who maybe they're a serial entrepreneur and they want to come up with their next idea and they know that it's somewhere inside of them. But like creativity really kind of comes within, right? It comes from allowing yourself to be open to external forces that might surprise you. There's a lot in a disciplined way you can do to make sure you're open, accessible to those. But a lot of it comes from being able to hear original ideas inside of you. And our world, especially our working world, is so noisy that we don't really stay open to that. And so it's a 90-day process, sort of a program. And you get up every morning, you do morning pages first thing, 3 pages longhand. It's not journaling. It's literally just a brain dump. So what is in my head? Yep. I started in January. I live in Vermont. My kids are ski racers. So winter is busy. We never sleep in, and I'm always just a little bit cranky. And every day, my morning pages would say things like, why am I awake right now? It's so dark. I can never get time to myself. My kids would come by and say, what are you doing, Mom? But then they started to change. And about halfway through the 3 pages, there's what Julie Cameron refers to as the 1.5 page mark, where the noise is gone and new things start to emerge. And about 6 weeks in, I was going for a walk through the woods, listening to some jazz music and drinking a cup of coffee, because a big part of the program is you have to do these artist state where the pages are mind dump, the artist state are sort of serendipity, right? Like allow something new in. I never listen to jazz music and I never walk slowly. I go to like spin class, right? So I'm walking around in the snow. I actually got lost And I was thinking and thinking and thinking about my parents and about everything I learned through processing the grief, about the fondest memories I have of that period with both of them was their memorial services. And why was that? And a lot of it was about being surrounded by people who loved them and the things people share at a memorial, the things they say to you, the little nuggets they offer as a condolence or memories that they've carried of your parents you've never heard before. And I realized as I was thinking about that all of these moments were very connected and they were verbal. And all this time I'd had this sort of weighty idea that I had to write a book, and I hated the idea of writing a book. And I stopped dead in my tracks. And I looked up at the sky and I think I said out loud, this is audio. I need to make an audio project. That is what I'm going to do. And the sense of knowing was so overwhelming. And this was months before I even had my sabbatical.
Yeah.
And then once I had the idea, I went full down that path. That spring, I started recording interviews with people. I developed a list of questions I had that were unanswered about my life, or even, is this memory even real or true? All the stuff you don't know when your parents are gone, you have to turn to other people for. I made a list, reached out with a very weird request of I'm working on a project. I don't know what it is. Would you be willing to do a Zoom call? Half of the people didn't even know what Zoom was. And I started the interviews. So that was all the stuff that was going on. And then by the time I got to the end of May, the day before my sabbatical, I had a therapy call and I had everything prepared. I had 17 interviews recorded. I had a great jumping off point. And I said to my therapist, I've decided not to do the sabbatical. And she was like, aren't you starting tomorrow? And I was like, yep. And it feels like too big of a risk. What if I don't make any money? I mean, I'm not going to make any money. What if I don't get the things out of this that I want? I'm giving myself 3 months. And I said to her, I really hope on the other end of this process, not only will I have made something that I have yet to actually define, not only will I have had this creative capstone to this long period of grief and processing even of burnout and all of the stuff, but really, I was looking for fresh inspiration for work. I felt like the business I had built immediately coming out of my old company was the business I knew how to make based on what I'd done before. It wasn't necessarily something I wanted to make. It was sort of just what was in me. And I wanted to think bigger and think different. I wasn't sure if the burnout I felt with work was the problem the work? Did I need to change the work I was doing, or was the problem me? And would I come back and find the work to feel different? Spoiler alert, it was the latter. But I didn't know what I was looking for, and I was afraid that I'd make this big bet, take 3 months off of earning for the first time in my life, come to the end of it and not have any new epiphanies, any new knowledge, maybe not finish the project, and just be me 3 months later with less money. That is completely as honest as I could possibly be about that. And Megan, my wonderful therapist, said, okay, it sounds like you have cold feet. And she said, let's list out the things that are making you nervous. List out the doubts, and let's come up with a couple of key things that we can work into your schedule to make you feel like you are very tangibly, as she put it, feeding the gremlins to create the space that you created for yourself. So long story short, she helped me do that. I built out office hour Fridays so that if anybody ever reached out to me in the summer, I would say, I'm not working this summer, but I can take calls on Fridays. And having that on my calendar gave me the peace of mind I needed to be able to work through the very scary days where I had nothing on my calendar and except to do some kind of nebulous creative output. So that's where it began. That was a long story.
Interestingly, the episode that just came out this week when we're recording is about how our childhoods impact our behaviors and habits in the workplace today.
I love that topic.
And my good friend is the guest on there, and she's doing she's getting certified to be a somatic practitioner. And one of the things that we talk about and that I have talked about in terms of my own relationship with my emotions is this idea of titration, that we cannot pull the rug completely out from under us of the things that we have used to survive this long. So if you are an achiever, you cannot go cold turkey on achieving. It's
oh my gosh.
too much
Yeah.
for our nervous system.
Oh,
So having that one anchor, it sounds like, was like it made it feel safer, right? To do this. I mean, you just said it yourself.
that is so interesting. And it reminds me, so at the outcome of this whole project, the process was this 6-part audio documentary that I ended up making. And in the 6th episode, I got back on the line with my therapist and I reflected with her. And I asked her if she'd be willing to let me record her. And there's some snippets of her in that episode, which is just a reflection. And, if you know any good therapists, they're always very demure about that kind of stuff. They're like, oh, no, I shouldn't. So, but she agreed. We had stopped working together by then. She had moved to Maine and took on a new job. But I asked her about that connection between the way we approach our professional lives and that burnout and the identity piece. And I was talking to her about why I had such a strong desire to take all of this processing I had done and live it out loud. Not everybody's like that. And I get that.
Yeah.
But to me, there's something about the sharing and the needing to be witnessed is a phrase she used to give me when I was talking about like planning my mother's memorial. She's like, you need to stand up there and you need people to see you and to hear you and hear what you have to say and be a part of this with you. It's a human experience. And she said something about how to be understood the way we want to be understood is so fundamental. You talk about the nervous system and we talked about fight or flight. It's such a natural, very fundamental, basic human need is to have other people understand us. And that then we got into the survival mode and how many of us in the professional world lean into hyperactivity, momentum. She said it's very common for women to seek out jobs. If you're born and raised from a fight or flight mode, where you've existed, if that's your primary state of being, you're going to seek out careers that constantly give you that adrenaline rush, and you're going to stay there. And I had done that completely. And when I think about the period I mentioned at the outset between leaving my corporate job and 3 years later when I was kind of in a place where I was safe enough and calm enough and connected enough to do this kind of a project and take this time and give myself this time, that's what I was doing. I was coming out of that addiction.
Yeah.
To that externalized validation, to the running really fast, to moving from a childhood of fight or flight to a career of fight or flight, to high stakes work, because that was my comfort zone.
I mean, you talked about feeling like you were floating in space, right? Like you went cold turkey.
So jarring.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. And one of the biggest lessons learned for me on the other side of this process, and I've thought about this so much, is that life gets so much more interesting and work gets so much more interesting when we stop over-engineering everything and forcing things to be and revert to a position of trusting our gut and our instincts and the world around us to deliver for us or show up for us, maybe not always how we thought, and allowing things to emerge. And this is so profound to me because when you do the artist's way, she always says, so that moment in the snow when I realized that I wanted to make an audio project and then immediately started thinking about all the reasons I'm not qualified to do that. I've never made a podcast. I have issues with hardware and microphones and headphones and all of that stuff, as you know. And I was like, how am I going to do this? I don't even know what's entailed in this. What she says is just do not let yourself go there. Yeah. Come back to right now and go to the next step, one step in front of the other. And coming out of that sabbatical, which was 3 months, I came back sort of to the real world September 1st of last year. And the third chapter really was the 4 months after. And I had moment after moment of realization of, oh, that is the thing that's going to change for me now. I've had such a rewarding experience by just doing one foot in front of the other. I felt unsatisfied with the business I'd built, even as much as enjoying a lot of it. And it was successful before the sabbatical because I had kind of forced it to being without allowing it to kind of emerge itself. And I decided coming out of the sabbatical when I realized that the problem was not the work, the problem was me. I came back to almost the exact same split of portfolio. The work all was waiting for me. It was all ready. Once I just turned it back on, it took a little while, but it all came back. But the work felt 150% different because I was different. So that was such a fascinating thing to learn and observe about myself. But I'm constantly saying, I think I've even said to you in our last few conversations that coming out of that, I'm trying intentionally every single day to remind myself of that learning of don't force it. Don't worry today about what's going to be on the books on the first day of January 2025, because you've got 5 years of data that tells you that there will be great stuff there. So just see what comes up today.
Yeah.
And if I could preserve that forever as the biggest learning from the sabbatical, that would be for me. I'd be so curious. I can't wait to hear this episode and hear what other people have gone through, because I'm curious if that's something that other people have experienced as well. The change of the pace, to your point of like lifelong habits. That's one of the ways it changed me.
Yeah. And I think it's going to show up differently for different people. And I think one of the reasons that you and I get on any call and we could go like 18 hours and like not, like we could just go is what we relate to each other a lot in terms of kind of the achieving the, moving from this like living through external validation into coming back to like our own desires and our own emotions and our own like humanity and what it is that we want. Like, I think our journey has been, there's so many things that you say that I'm like, I could say that literal exact same line, like, and feel very much like I feel like we get each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is your story, right? And this is how it felt for you, because what you were rewiring is, instead of listening to the outside world, listening to your inside world. And that's like my single biggest piece of work in life also is
always, right? Constant. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not everybody's work, right? That other people have different work. But I think one of the things that is like super present for me right now as we're talking about this is when you started your business, left corporate, started the business, it was like all or nothing, right? It was like, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to start this literally the next week, which is crazy, by the way, Kat, but that's fine. Like,
it is.
I think I quit in September of 2019. And I don't know, I guess my first client was like May of 2020, right? So it was like, I had a long time in between, but I didn't intend to start a business, actually. I intended to take time off, right? So it's quite a different experience, but the idea of all or nothing, I think, is a piece of why taking breaks is hard for people. Yeah. And I love what you said about, yes, you had cold feet. You're like, oh my gosh, how am I going to, go from having this super successful business? By the way, I want to say, like, I know your business was very successful by whatever standards are like popular externally, right? You were busy, you were making money, you were doing good work. Great. Yeah. Like, whether or not that was success to you is a whole different question, but leaving something behind that's really successful and going into a moment where it's like, I don't know what's going to happen on the other end. And just even having that Friday to take calls from potential clients to keep those connections, like, that's a great example of like, we don't have to be so dramatic about these things. Like, it's okay. It's not like you're not failing yourself or like anything like that by like having a day where you're going to take calls.
Oh my gosh. But I love that. Two things that jars loose. I loved everything you just said. When I had that call with Megan and she called me out for having cold feet and did what a good therapist does and talked me through what it was that was really underneath that. She said, don't forget that this is yours. You get to make this up.
Yes.
So how are we going to make this up for you? And I was like, oh, right. And that was the day before. And I was nervous because it was so unstructured. And she helped me, to your point, we can't pull the rug completely out from under the habits and things that we've developed and learned to survive. And some structure was needed, but not so much that I wouldn't have the discovery. So after the sabbatical was done, I was chatting with one of my former clients, longtime friend of mine who lives in Europe. And I was telling her all of like the things I'd learned, and she just stopped me mid-sentence and she said, I just hope that you can let yourself right now move from thinking of this as a one-time, once-in-a-lifetime experience to something that maybe you can start to do periodically. So to your point, how can we shift to where we can even be more comfortable doing this more often? I mean, you know that I take Mondays off for my mental health Mondays. And what that really means in practice is I block the whole day. No one can put stuff on my calendars. I do live in Vermont, so it's important to me to get outside. every Monday, even in the depth of winter, even in pouring down rain, like I need to go be outside. So that's what I have to do because I've learned that that is like a system override, especially on the days I don't feel like it. I have to go outside and I have to start my week that way. And as a working mother, having Monday to shift from weekend parenting to weekday activities is really important for me for survival. That's often when I'll have therapy. It also removes any excuses I have to say, I don't have time to pay the bills. I don't have time to call the doctor about that thing. I don't have time to do whatever. I have it on Mondays. And some days I go to the gym and I come home and I work for 6 hours, but nobody knows I'm working. So I feel like I'm hiding. And that's a luxury.
Secret.
So,
Yeah.
and what was important to me about that habit that I started in around 2022 or 2021, I think, was making it structured, working it in. So in some ways you could say like, I've already started to do this, but we get to make this stuff up when we work for ourselves. And even when you work for other people, you have some room to carve out or hold certain times and windows. And I really am a huge believer, especially after that sabbatical, of finding ways to work that into every day, or to maybe start to say, when I take my next sabbatical, because I've had a second season idea for the podcast ever since last October, and I have made no movement on it because it was too easy to get right back out of that. Be like, that's done, close that door, move forward, get back to business as usual. And I think that's part of the lesson learned that I'm still working through is how to make sure that I let myself rethink what business as usual is, which I think is kind of the point you were just making.
Yeah, 100%. I think you can bring pieces back from your sabbatical, right? You can bring pieces of your work life into your sabbatical. I think it's a matter of like exactly what you just said. There are no rules, and I think in this kind of thing, I'm projecting my own feelings and thoughts onto, anyone listening, but the idea of like, okay, I'm going to take this sabbatical. Like I have to make this exactly what a sabbatical should be, right? And the shoulds like creep back in because now I'm taking time for me, and yet I'm going to let it be directed by what the outside world expects, and I think that's just, it's a point that I feel like I wanted to, that I feel passionate about is like, it gets to be whatever you want it to be. But the important part is reflecting on what you actually need.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what do you need? And that can look like the time that you are reflecting and doing things that are outside of your norm, but it can also look like I need some kind of structure. I need to have this anchor in my week. And so I really appreciate that, like that piece of it, because it's the real part of it, right?
Oh, it makes it feel real. Like it's something that I think a sabbatical is something we talk about in theoretics. It's become more popular. But that's, as always with these things, a little bit of a mixed blessing because I think the level of actual tangible understanding of what happens on a sabbatical is obviously it's flexible, it's open to interpretation, but I think it's exactly what you just said there. It's about stepping out of your day-to-day work flow and way of spending time and adjusting that for a distinct amount of time and doing it to some purpose, to whatever you need. What is your very first question? What's the state that you were in going into this? And then my 45-minute answer, because it was long. There was a lot going into it. But I remember my old company had started to introduce sabbaticals. I think they were offering 1 month after 10 years of service. So I left, before I would have been able to take advantage of that. But I think about 1 month and I don't think I could have done, it would have been helpful in some way. It wouldn't have been what mine was. And I do think that it's much harder to go from the initial concept to the execution, to the follow-up and the reflection and the integration of everything comes out of a sabbatical than anybody realizes till they get into it. Or maybe they do realize and they don't do it because they realize that it's going to be hard. But I think the reason that it's becoming more popular is everything you just said about the importance of us finding a way to step away. I did have one friend who said, you do realize there's versions of sabbaticals where you don't do anything productive.
What, you don't produce a 6-episode podcast?
She was like, I was envisioning when you said you were taking time off that you actually were taking time off. And instead you just were really busy on a project that wasn't your usual work stuff. And I was like, And then also immediately after I came back, I had a little bit of a crisis of what do I do? Am I a podcast maker now? Is this a new thing that I need to do? And a friend of mine said to me, what if you allowed this to just be what it is, which is a medium that you found and loved as a way to express yourself that was really fulfilling. Maybe you'll do it again now that you know. I loved the recording, I loved the writing, I loved the music, I loved all the creative opportunities that the audio medium offered. I hated the chaos of the podcast landscape and how hard it is. It's just so like wild, wild west out there. But it really felt like my medium. And she said, what if you don't do what you usually do and consultify this and say, how can I make money? Who might need this? How could I sell it to them? And that was really profound because it gave me sort of the freedom to just let it be and not have to over-engineer or force it or even potentially ruin sort of the magic of what it was for me.
Yeah.
By trying to shoehorn it into my business and just letting it be. Obviously, I work with people in identity. So what it's ultimately turned out to be is like a really, really, really giant, very authentic proof point to my ability to tell a story and to my belief that it's a very valid way to spend time. And it certainly made me better at my work.
Yeah. And maybe season 2 will be through a different medium. Like, who knows, right? It can be whatever it wants to be.
Yeah. I shouldn't over-engineer it, should I? What I do need to do is listen to the urges that I have to create the space for it. That would be the one other thing I would love to say is, so on the Monday through Thursday of those weeks, where Fridays were my easiest and best days of the week because they were my comfort zone. All I had to do was sit at my computer and do what my calendar told me, which I've been doing for 20 years now.
Yeah.
And Monday through Thursday, I had to learn how to have a creative discipline in a way that I had never had before. And that's so different from the way we operate in the corporate world, where you have to create space intentionally when you know that you can't totally rush what you're doing and you're not even sure where you're going with it. So I had a list of things I could do if I got stuck or discouraged or felt despair in the middle of those unstructured days. And one of them was the book Bird by Bird, Anne Lamott. Another famous one, now that you know The Artist's Way, you hear that all the time, Anne Lamott, Bird by Bird, you start to hear that all the time. It's a book about writing. And what I had planned is that if I ever had a day where I was trying to write and I was like, what in the world am I doing? Everything I'm writing is so stupid. This is not good. I can't do this. I would go sit outside and read one chapter. And it worked so well. I would literally go read it and I wouldn't even really be paying attention to what I was reading. But the act of getting up, going downstairs and being like, here's what I'm feeling. Here's my tool. Or I would just go for a walk around the neighborhood, right, and come back. And I always sat down. But what I also found is that it usually took me 3 hours a day to get anywhere, to just get started. 3 hours. I would mess around. I'd stare out the window. I would pet my dog for like an hour straight. I'd come up with anything I could do to avoid sitting down and actually creating. And then once I got into it, it was so magical. But that's sort of the point of why you can't shoehorn this into a portion of your day.
Yeah.
So I do think that I need to find ways to maybe recreate some space now that I know what it takes for me to make the kind of stuff that I want to make. Talking to you right now is reminding me how much I want to find ways to weave that back into my working life. And maybe it's adding one more day a week where I have my mental health days and then I have my creativity days and just valuing it enough to protect it. And I think that's part of the point. To your point, sabbatical and the outcome is all about what you went into it needing. And clearly a year later, I'm still here kind of feeling the benefits almost daily of taking that time. Almost daily. I have a moment where I go, that's because I took that time off. I can see it. I can feel it in my business. I'm having the best year I've ever had because I have so much more energy and I think people can sense it. And I'm being much more true to myself and I'm attracting stuff that's exciting to me. I'm much more open to anything, to possibilities. And that is a huge benefit. So I don't want to lose all of that.
Yeah. I love that. This idea of maybe integrating a sabbatical, right? The creative time into your weeks now, even when you're not taking, quote unquote time off completely in a block, it can be part of your day to day. So that's great.
I'll let you know when I figure that part out.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And
next
it can
level.
Change. Yeah. It could be whatever it needs to be. So Amazing. Well, this was a great conversation. Frankly, it went a totally different direction than I thought it was going to go. And I think it
Really?
was the
Oh,
direction it needed to go. Yeah.
interesting. You never know when you ask me one question, I talk for 20 minutes straight, but that's how much I was excited to talk. So thank you. This was so fun. So fun.
So good to have you
I
on.
really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Okay. So that was a great conversation. And I want to just come back to this idea of not being all or nothing, not totally disconnecting ourselves from the things that have helped us survive for so long. Like, if that's for you, being a doer or an achiever. For Kat, it felt like too big of a risk to take time off and have nothing tethering her back to the identity that she knew or to this person that she was in her career. The thing that she knows how to generate income by doing things. So she would still take calls on Fridays to keep connected to former or potential clients or stay connected to her network. Now, when I mentioned this idea of titration, this is a term that comes from the scientific world, but it's been borrowed by the somatic practitioner world to talk about how we can kind of train our nervous systems. Now, our bodies are wired to keep us safe, but if we move too far, too fast, we can actually experience the opposite of what we might be trying to accomplish. If I try to go from a super high stress, quick moving career where I'm working 60 hours a week to total relaxation, it might actually be too shocking to my body and I won't be able to relax. Or worse, it might send my system into survival mode. So I talk about this idea in depth with my friend and guest, Erin Bowdy, in episode 42. So if you want to hear more about that, then I would definitely check out that episode. Now, during the conversation, I mentioned to Kat that it kind of went in a totally different direction than I had planned. And frankly, I shouldn't have been shocked. She and I always go super deep on so many life topics anytime that we talk. But also, I loved where it went. The time and intention that she took to plan what she wanted out of her time away was, I think, the biggest takeaway for anyone who wants to take a sabbatical. So how can we be more intentional about the time that we take off? I think it really comes back to slowing down now, meaning before you actually take the time off, and really considering what you need, as Kat and I talked about. I also urge you not to wait until it feels like an emergency or like you have to take a break because you're on the verge of some kind of crisis, whether it's mentally or physically. When you're there, it's going to be very hard to be intentional about the time that you have away. Now, of course, if you're in that state, take the time off. But I would encourage everybody to think about, how can I get ahead of this state and take the time off so that I can actually have some real benefits to it instead of it being a recovery period? Those lasting benefits on the other side of time away can really only come when we're really intentional about that time. So how can we do this? I'm going to start by asking you to ask yourself 4 questions. First is, what are my goals for my time away? What do I want to do with my time, and how do I want to feel at the end of it? The second question is, why is this goal, or why are these goals important to me? Like, what will it get me, or how will it benefit me? The third question is, how will I know if I'm on track? As in, moving toward what I intended to do or to get out of this time. You can identify this kind of success measure in advance so that you can think about how you might want to make sure that you're staying true to your intentions of your time. And then fourth is, what's going to get in the way of me accomplishing these things during my time off? What barriers might you encounter? Now, if you're having a hard time just getting started on your goals, you could try what's called a scripting exercise. Now, this is a little bit of a combination of a visualization with a journal or a writing exercise. What you're going to do is imagine that it's 6 months from now or however long that you might be wanting to take off. And you have had the most incredible sabbatical. Write a journal entry about a day in your life, any day towards the end of your time away, as if it's your current reality and these amazing things have all already happened. And you may need to spend some time to relax, to clear your mind, to really allow yourself to see it in your mind. Visualize yourself, spend some time with it, and then start writing. Now, if you're really feeling super blocked still, The Artist Way, the book that Kat mentioned, is a great way to break yourself out of a rut or get your creative muscles moving again. Okay, that is all I have for you now. I hope you took away both a lot of inspiration from these 2 episodes and some practical ideas from this 2-part episode to take that break from your career and do something that you maybe need or have wanted for a very long time.